Welcome to the Geekscape Book Club. As always, I am Christian Bladt, joined this month by the one, the only Count Eric Conner. Eric, how are you?
I am doing fine today. How about yourself, young man?
I'm doing great. It's a Pleasant Valley Sunday, as they say, here in the beautiful downtown Burbank. So this month we are talking about two Adam Warlock stories: the Infinity Entity. And because I got to the end of the Infinity Entity and was like, oh, this is really not any kind of an ending. So then we moved on to Thanos Infinity Finale. The Infinity Finale, though, is where my friend artist Andy Smith comes in, and he'll join us a little bit later in this episode. When I mentioned that we were doing it, he said he'd be happy to jump on for a bit.
Cool.
So we'll talk to him in a little bit. Uh, let's talk, and we're talking about Adam Warlock because anyone who's seen a trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 know that he factors into it at some point. I have seen the movie. Eric has not seen the movie. I enjoyed the movie. Eric may or may not. He isn't able to weigh in because he hasn't seen it yet. So, that's just where we're at. But remember, I did take you to see Thor: Love and Thunder, so there's always that.
Oh, we always have love, and we always have thunder.
Always have thunder. Um, my familiarity with Adam Warlock was very limited. There is in the early 90s, there was a big crossover event, the Infinity Gauntlet, which is a familiar sounding story to fans of the MCU in that Thanos is assembling all of the Infinity Gems, as they were called in the book, the Infinity Stones. And he is basically going to obliterate. I don't think it was only half of humanity. Now, I haven't read it in 30 years, but he's trying to impress death. So, one of the most interesting things about the comic version of Thanos is that he has love for death embodied in female form in the comic books, and they're an item, and so he's
Oh
trying
yeah.
to impress death. Adam Warlock makes an appearance in there, but the character of Adam Warlock was gone for the point in the 80s where I started reading comic books. So he kind of came back a little bit later. Thanos was also dead. It's basically, Jim Starlin wasn't working with these characters anymore, so they weren't really around. Now, these are more recent books. I believe they're both from 2015, 2016.
16, yeah.
One of them is definitely from 2016. I just don't know, how the issue release schedule. So I thought it would be interesting to dive into this character of Adam Warlock. All I knew about him was just sort of references in terms of just how incredibly powerful he was. And I believe when the character was first introduced, he was just called him, which I think Adam Warlock is certainly better. Just Warlock is good, but then that's confusing with the character Warlock from the New Mutants. So I thought that this was a good story, and I had looked up and gotten some recommendations on Adam Warlock stories. So this being a recent one, this being written by Jim Starlin, and also providing some wonderful artwork by two of my favorite artists, Alan Davis, who people know from Captain Britain and Excalibur, among other things, and Ron Lim, who did the new Silver Surfer series that started about 1987. So all of that preamble leads me to Eric. What was your familiarity with Adam Warlock before reading these two volumes?
I realized for the pardon me, for the longest time, I think I had conflated the Sentry, and Adam Warlock as one character. Because I did not know Adam Warlock that well, and I think when both of them were kicking around as significant sort of characters with through lines throughout the universe, I wasn't reading comic books as much. Though I definitely there was I'm trying to remember if it was the Secret Wars reboot they did. That Sentry kind of was a big piece of that, or possibly Civil War, where
Right.
Sentry I always found fascinating, and it was interesting because as I was reading this, some of what I found interesting about Sentry, like these characters who are incredibly powerful, but have a hard time with their mental health, I find really interesting. And so there are moments here where Adam Warlock is just sort of lost in the universe. But I realized I did not know him that well
Yeah.
until it wasn't here. It was definitely bef- before your Guardians of the Galaxy 2 came out, because when they mentioned, I call him Adam,
Yeah.
at the end of that, I knew who they were alluding to. But it's very similar to you. I think, again, we're close in age, though I know I look much younger than you, Christian,
You absolutely do, yes.
and have a much younger
And
soul.
for our audio audience, we should point out that Eric is much more handsome than I am.
And for our video audience, we should point that out too.
It's apparent to them. It's absolutely apparent to them.
You might believe us. But by the way, I do have to mention, I just grabbed this off my wall. The man who, if this movie came, if Adam Warlock had a film in the early 80s, it would be this fine actor playing him. Ladies and gentlemen,
Brian
of the radio
Bosworth?
audience, that is Sam J. Jones.
Oh, Sam Jones, who of course was Flash Gordon.
Yes, already has the hair, perfect feathered blonde hair. So yes, but this is a good introduction. I think we'll talk about it, because I'm glad you had us read the second set of stories.
I felt like we couldn't do just that volume by itself,
No.
Infinity Entity, and that's part of the problem. At least there are times where I read our Geekscape Book Club book the day before we record, and it's fine if you or any of our other friends who have sat in are reading the day before. But as the person who determines the homework, the reading list, the syllabus, if you were, if I had done this yesterday, I would have been like, I feel like we're doing something that's very incomplete. And you get a little bit of a picture. And I found that story to certainly be interesting, but I think it needed to be in the context of the Infinity finale. Now, the Infinity finale is also, this is apparently, according to our pal Andy Smith, who will be joining us a little later, this is a part of a trilogy of stories, whereas the Infinity Entity kind of was, the lead into Infinity finale. So he worked on all 3 volumes, and we'll talk to him a little bit about that when we get to it. But I thought that, it's almost like Infinity Entity is when they put out one of those graphic novels or miniseries that it like ties into a movie. And so like you can read this before the movie, and then Infinity Finale is the actual movie. So it's like the Infinity Entity is setting up the big thing, but it's not really the big thing. No. I am sure you could read these other volumes without reading Infinity Entity, except of course for the fact that it's written by Jim Starlin and has again wonderful artwork from both Alan Davis and Ron Lim. So but it's not essential. So yeah, I immediately was like, we got to read the next thing, and I was able to quickly get both volumes in my possession, and then
and
leave them in a care package on your doorstep.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, Alan Davis also did some of the penciling. I'm holding this up for the radio audience. He did the penciling for it was split into Thanos Annual 1 and Infinity Entity. So he actually did the penciling for the Infinity Entity.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So. I wasn't sure if he had just done Thanos Infinity finale, because I actually found the style of Thanos Infinity finale, like I absolutely loved the drawing of that, and the penciling. Everything was really beautiful, and the first part was good. The second part, it felt maybe because the visuals were just much more enticing. There was more going on in the second part of the story. It's a lot of preamble. And arguably the first volume was just preamble, but it's interesting because it's easy to get lost when the stories are happening on the grand cosmic scale with the in-betweener and entity, and where like the least powerful person in the room is Watu, the Watcher. When the Watcher is not the most powerful person in the room, you're like, I know, right? He's like the also ran. He's like, it's like you see all the greatest dudes, and then the Watcher's like, I'm here too. Hey guys, hey, I'm not in the picture.
It's like hey, last time I checked, your name wasn't the talker or the doer. So shh, you're just here to watch.
The sitter.
Creep. He's such a creep. He's always watching everything. But and it can be a little tough when you're dealing with these, all powerful beings. There's a,
Agree.
an offhand comment at one point. It's, like, oh, well, Adam Warlock is still learning how to deal with his omnipotence. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably difficult to deal with, being omnipotent. And so sometimes the stories, when they happen on that big of a scale, they almost seem insignificant because it's like, it's just too much. The stakes are too high. And it's like, well, what about the end of everything? You're like, everything? I'm like, yep, everything. Whereas like the original Secret Wars, it was like, this really powerful dude just kind of puts them on a planet and makes them fight. I'm like, I like that. It's like a Godzilla movie, let them fight, so, but I mean, I found it to be interesting, and it's characters that I'm familiar with for, having read comic books for much of the last 40 years. But those big, powerful beings like Eternity, you don't see them that often because it's like there's too much, like Galactus is you want to talk about an also ran in here, it's like, oh yeah, Galactus got his ass kicked at some point, and you're like, what? You don't
I
even
love the
show him
image of
that.
him dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's all like dried out like a prune. It's great. It's like, and I think that could not agree with you more, Christian. I tend to agree with Christian. This is not big dramatic
Every once in
news.
a while we agree. Yes.
Yeah, I mean the X Factors, if you have ever heard our buddy Michael Shirley speak, much more of the X Factor of opinions. But
Yeah.
I completely agree. Like I think what hooked you and I into Marvel was very similar. It was much more like, character driven, much more real world issues. Like Spider-Man's great because he has to keep down a part-time job. The X-Men are outcasts. Like there were just things in there anyone could emotionally connect to. So when it gets into sort of celestial beings, it tends to leave me a little cold. Now, where it gets good in the second half is basically the stakes become much more tangible, which I think helps because they're talking in ways in the first half, which is, you're right, so cosmic, so kind of like the end of all time and all space. It's like, okay, well, I mean, on my list of worries, that's relatively low in my everyday life. It's definitely well below even the Flyers turnaround. So in essence, like that's stuff that's unrelatable. And I think the issue they ran into with that first half is that it feels like they're just alluding to so much kind of off screen, where we're like hearing things but we're not seeing it. It's kind of cool seeing the sort of wake of destruction, but when we're not seeing the destruction, it at some point you're like, okay, like get to it, please. And I can't imagine reading this as like an issue every month, right? Because this was not released as a one storyline.
Yeah, no, what we read were collections. These were
Yeah.
each, I assume, monthly, but you never know with deadlines.
It could have been bi-weekly,
And
I suppose.
much as what we read last month, which was this Kang the Conqueror series that we did, that is interestingly enough
floating in the ether.
Yeah. But the Only Myself Left to Conquer, that also I felt like would not have been as easy of a read on a monthly basis. And it's, that's a separate conversation about how a lot of time these books aren't even taking into consideration, the monthly audience. They're really for collections and trade paperbacks and, digital Marvel Unlimited viewing and reading. But I really agree that I was glad that we read both of these, all at once and so close together. Let's talk a little bit about Infinity Entity. Basically, as it begins, there's this notion that, Adam Warlock had been captive of a nihilist from the Negative Zone, who was a character that I remember fairly well from John Byrne's run of Fantastic Four. But we get some interesting things with Adam Warlock. He goes and hangs out with the original Avengers, which, for continuity reasons, instantly everyone forgets about it because, you got to do that sometimes when with your time traveling. Other times it could be interesting if you leave it, but that was one. And I thought it was cool. You see like the original Avengers and,
Hulk in his spandex shorts.
Yeah, it was a good look for Hulk, for
yeah.
sure. And, it's just sort of him kind of Yeah, it's funny. I made an offhanded comment to something being like Quantum Leap, but it's kind of like what he's doing. He's jumping around through time and seeing little snippets and trying to find something. And interestingly, what he needs to meet up with in Infinity Entity, we're talking about Adam Warlock, of course, is that he needs to, he ends up meeting up with Thanos. And, the reason why this is a decent jumping in story is the simple fact that Adam Warlock doesn't have his memory. So he kind of, he's like really only remembers some very basic stuff, and he gets more as the story goes along, which is, I think, a convention of storytelling. At a certain point, it's like, well, you can't have him not know anything. You know what I mean? So, and he just, he meets up with the in-betweener, stuff like that, characters that I kind of remember from the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, but I don't know that I'd ever actually read anything with them,
I did like the in-betweener reminded me of a black and white cookie. So
So
anything
did
that
you get
does
hungry?
that. Well, we
Yeah.
just recently had black and white cookies, so I had
Oh my
it was
gosh.
like a fondness of the memory of a day ago when I
Oh
was
yeah.
eating that black and white cookie. And
Oh,
could you tell me about Annihilus? Because I remember the name. I
yeah.
got excited because it reminded me of one of our favorite characters, Darth Nihilus from the Star Wars universe.
Oh,
Uh,
I thought you were going to say Turner D Century, but
oh well, listen, Turn of Century like a black and white cookie, never far from my thoughts.
that's
But
fair.
what is Annihilus's personality? Like
So he
of all the villains, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very simple. He is sort of the most manic of villains in the the best / worst of the Stanley Jack Kirby villains. Like he's a bug Doctor Doom that rules the negative zone basically. And so like it's like you rule that zone. And we deal with Mephisto in the story, and he rules Hades. So basically, he's the devil. He rules in hell, but only there. So you can think of Annihilus like that, and he had come up with a way to imprison Adam Warlock, and we're following Adam Warlock around when he's thinking that he's actually gotten out, but that's where it starts to get confusing, because there's like this small manifestation of himself. And then Thanos is doing the same thing. There's a callback to, for our visual audience, what's in my background, which is the Infinity Gauntlet, the series that I mentioned. So the time where he had all the Infinity Gems and they were all in the Infinity Gauntlet, he was able to split his consciousness to kind of try and, it's almost like he's like, well, I know this isn't going to work out, so I gotta plan for the next big fight, and so that was all sort of part of what he had going on. And it was kind of interesting. There's also the extra confusion added into the fact that this Adam Warlock is apparently not our reality's Adam Warlock, the one that, it's not our Marvel 616 Adam Warlock. This is a different Adam Warlock who his reality was compacted directly into him. So he's all powerful, but that's also why the in-betweener can't be around him, because there's another in-betweener there. And I'm sure that visual made Eric think about someone dropping a black and white cookie and having the pieces splinter all over the floor, and then just kind of wondering at that point, what could we possibly do? Can we enjoy this cookie? Is it too late? All the important questions, really.
Do I let the dog get it, or am I the dog?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So in any case,
but is Annihilus like? I apologize. It maybe because you reminded me of that character in Space Ghost Coast to Coast. The grasshopper.
Not Drax. Well,
Drax?
Brack. No,
Brack.
I know who you're talking about, but
talks like this.
Yeah,
like that guy. Like
I can't remember his name, but yeah, he is like that bug guy. Yeah.
Right, and so thus you have all these fabulous villains who show up in this. By the way, I mean,
sure.
You got the really the murderer's row of great supervillains, and yet he's the one who's the main antagonist. Or maybe you could say Warlock's psyche is the main antagonist. You could make that argument.
Sure.
But either way, I did find him in the story a less than fascinating villain, because he just was so. It's one of those like hell-bent on destruction. We've seen that so many times. And what makes Thanos interesting, is that there's a really interesting logic to him. Doctor Doom is interesting because he's got that god complex to him. Like he even has one great line in there. Like if this was such a thing, I would have figured it out already. I'm misquoting it, but
no, but yeah,
that attitude
right, exactly.
comes off in one sentence.
And I think that Annihilus has the central role in the story because they need someone that could so easily be a puppet of Mephisto. You know what I mean? It could, like
Right.
a lot of
great. Always like
a
Mephisto.
lot of these others, I think, wouldn't have felt for the basically like, oh, here I am, and basically in a rubber mask, pretending to not be the lord of the underworld. And so I did think it was an interesting choice, but then as the story went along, I'm like, it's because he's a bit of a patsy. You know what I mean? They basically have that, and the revelation as the Infinity Entity goes along is that because we see Mephisto early on, and he's like talking to Thanos, and then he disappears, and then he comes back as like, actually, I'm this other guy, and I actually forgot the name of that character because
no, I have that Dr. Boltar.
Dr. Boltar, which is straight out of Battlestar Galactica, by the way. Dr. Baltar, Gaius Baltar, who was the Cylon sympathizer in both iterations of that show. But in any case, I should have remembered it because I remember making that connection when I read it. But so that's who Mephisto's pretending to be, and then he carries on that charade as the Thanos Infinity finale comes along. Specifically talking about the Infinity Entity before we move along, before our guest pops in. What were, as you read through that volume, there's those 4 issues, and then they also had that Thanos annual at the beginning of it. What did you feel as you read that? I felt like it was a nice refresher, but it clearly wasn't the main story. That's why we had to read more. But what was your thought, Eric?
I enjoyed the sense of, okay, with this framework, we could then bounce around a bit, which is, I think, really great. So you see, it's like, okay, let's insert him into an old school Avengers story. Let's bring him over here. Let's bring the Celestials in. So if nothing else, like, I think it very much was like you were just kind of like a good primer, for kind of getting us into these characters, the stakes. I kind of love that early on. It's like, oh my God, he's going to fight all the Avengers, and he takes them down like that. And of course, by the way, the squeak was almost on cue with my snap. Yep, there it is again. Thanks, Fezzik. Yes, this is a perfect time to play. For the radio audience, that is my Australian Shepherd, not just an Andre the Giant character I hire on the weekends. No, would if I could. But
we all would if we all could. Absolutely.
Most def. But yeah, I think it was one of those. I'm very glad I read it together because I definitely think if I had to read this one issue at a time, it gets into even like the issues with like binge TV and how some Netflix shows approach their seasons where they treat it like, well, it's just 3 acts of a really long story, which means episode to episode, sometimes the needle of the storytelling only moves so much. And that's kind of what it felt like here, though I love the payoff at the end was great.
But that was
a great reveal.
And when you got to that payoff, you're like, oh, this is why we can't be done with this, because that reveal that it is Mephisto, and it's a reverse Wizard of Oz. It's like actually you've been here all along, and it's like a mashup of the Wizard of Oz and that film Johnny Got His Gun that Metallica used for the one video where the guy's just all in his mind because which we often think about how we could do a mashup of that, and basically that's Adam Warlock in this. They have sort of that level of consciousness. What I love about both of these stories, by the way, and we'll talk to Andy about this when he pops in, is the inclusion of Pip the Troll, who is such like a ridiculous character that, especially when you see the amount of power that he represents and wields and the influence he has, I'm like, but he's still Pip the Troll, and maybe one day we'll get Pip the Troll on the big screen, but so far we have not.
I sent you the image from the Eternals because it's also it's already gone down in lore for being probably the worst rendered CG character they've done in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, which only made me
Was
like it more.
Yeah, and you sent me so many pictures that I'm gonna
Oh, I
have to
thought I
spend.
know.
No, it's my fault because I I didn't download them properly like I usually do. Sometimes when I share the pictures you send me, I just use them, I just basically share the screen with my email,
I,
and then I do that. But it was hastily accomplished, and I can share Pip the Troll from Eternals, which I believe was voiced by Patton Oswalt.
yes, it was.
Yeah. So yeah, he didn't look great. He did look like Patton Oswalt, which that part was great. But there he was with Harry Styles, and it was exciting to get Pip the Troll. And I guess maybe what I was getting at was a story that revolves around him, but I wouldn't count on it. Let's put it that way.
I don't see. Yeah, if there is a one-off called Pip, you and I will be there 20 times, and only you and I will be there.
And what if it has a really great lyrical book and it's called Pippin? I don't know, just something to think about. Neither here
Pippin ain't
nor
easy.
there. Yeah, but it sure is fun. So yes,
and by the way, they used him really well here. I mean, obviously,
yes, I agree.
Part of the lore of him with his brief entry into the MCU is starting on kind of an auspicious debut, but really the way it fit into this story felt right. It was good comedic relief, but didn't feel forced. And he had a moment where he's like, "How do I take him down with no weapons?" And then he throws something, and he does it. He's like, "Wow, that worked." And I'm like, "All right, I like Pip." And then his at the end, the tag of him and Warlock being reunited, I thought was pretty awesome as well. So it was a good use of that character. They gave him enough to do that it actually, weirdly enough, a bit of the story did hinge on him, and he's kind of an unexpected hero, kind of like the rat in Endgame. Just like a small
Oh yeah.
character whose actions actually could save the whole world.
Yeah, no, I think that there are those interesting characters, and you feel like, all right, Jim Starlin clearly has some kind of affinity for Pip. That's why he kind of strong armed him in here, and it's not even it's not even a criticism. It's just like, oh yeah, they made sure that there was room for him, and I think that basically this second story, it's sort of what we're alluding to, is this idea that this is really a Thanos story that happens to feature Adam Warlock, and he factors into it, but it's really sort of Thanos kind of dealing with this idea that basically he and Adam Warlock basically caused the end of everything, of all reality, and just sort of trying to figure out how do you fix that,
Right.
and yeah, and it's sort of the way that it well, we can spoil things and talk about things out of order, but this idea that there needs to be a living tribunal,
Mm-hmm.
and that was what I referenced earlier, that because he absorbed everything, that created a problem, and then he ends up taking on that mantle, which is kind of interesting, because then you always wonder, like, so what happens next for Adam Warlock after this? But that's a conversation for another time. Just sort of reading this, and it's they definitely do a good job in Infinity Finale of setting up this idea that it's the my Star Trek fans know it as the Kobayashi Maru, the no-win situation. He's definitely in a no-win scenario, and that's why you need friends like Pip the Troll. You need somebody that's unassuming who can really help you out of a jam, because there's being omnipotent, and then there's being impotent in your omnipotence. Yes, I felt like that was very clever. Just now.
I was amused. I was
Thank
waiting
you.
for you to go there.
Yeah.
And you arrived.
Yeah. We were circling around it for kind of a while now. But what are some things that stood out to you from specifically this story, which does really start out as Thanos' story, and then and then Adam Warlock is wrapped in basically the second half of it, probably issues 3 and 4 of Infinity Finale.
Well, I guess you could say cosmic global destruction makes for strange bedfellows. Right? These are two...
I've always said that. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
first time I met you, I said that. And
yeah,
like,
no, it was an odd way to introduce yourself.
And you were like, "Sir, this is an Arby's."
Big talk for a man who's getting extra barbecue sauce. Yeah,
exactly.
And these two have battled each other many times, right? That I feel like that's like
you're talking about Thanos and Adam Warlock.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because they're kind of set up as equals on that end, and so this idea they have to actually work together is kind of great, and especially how they sort of meet in the middle, like when the world, when it can't just say the world, when I guess the universe, all space and time is destroyed, and really I love the rendering of just pure white with just the two characters and nothing else. Got some end of the Never-Ending Story vibes from it, even though they didn't have white there. It was just two people and one grain of sand or something. So, but the idea of like, hey, we have to fix this, and this was not in either of our plans, and so there was something I thought, again, it was a bit more emotional. Like suddenly, it did feel much more drawn by characters' goals versus let's just throw kind of a bunch of problems out onto the page. This felt much more emotional, much more driven by them, and thus it became a lot more interesting. Like I definitely had more skin in the game, and I really enjoyed how Warlock wakes up and you think that's going to solve everything, but nope, quite the opposite. It destroys everything.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, this is sort of going back to the end of the first volume. This was one of the things that you sent me that I wanted to focus on. It's sort of that reveal that Adam Warlock is still there, still a president of Nihilus. Right. And it's all the handiwork of Mephisto, which, it's the impression in this second story, Infinity Finale, is this idea that Annihilus is actually the mastermind behind everything. But it's, again, he's just having his strings pulled, not even very, he's not having his strings pulled very hard. It's a very light puppetry. It's more of a Muppetry, where it's like,
very much
you can move him pretty easily. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Baltar is kind of like first of all, I was excited because I thought, okay, I could play Dr. Baltar. If I shave, I don't know, I could easily be looking like him. I haven't seen my beardless face in a long time.
It's a cosplay that you feel like you could pull off, and maybe not everybody is going to be showing up at Comic-Con, and we've got a little bit of a glare in this image, but it's really a great look for Dr. Baltar, I think. And
I think if I went into Comic-Con in San Diego dressed as Dr. Baltar, the 7 people who recognized it would be really impressed.
That's 7 pictures that you would have to take with people, and
right.
But there would not be an 8th.
Nope, and I would charge them through the nose for the privilege.
Oh yes, of course you would. That's
go full Hollywood Boulevard.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's absolutely. So, I kind of again, I enjoy this story. And I think because I guess because it is different than a lot of what I have read, recently, semi-recently, even going back. So it's really the Infinity Gauntlet was like the big event on this scale. And I think they've done a number more since then, but that was really the one for me. And, you would hear a lot about Thanos, Warlock, Captain Marvel, who had already passed by the time I was reading comics. And they've really stuck to keeping Marvel dead because of the impact of him dying in the first Marvel graphic novel. They'll do things where they'll pull him out from earlier points in time from before he died. They've done that a couple of times, but it's usually so far, it's he's dead until he isn't anymore. But so I thought it was fun to get to see these characters and some of them, and there's definitely a few that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember him from the back cover of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. So
it's a deep track, right?
yeah. Do you feel like these two stories do a good job to have people at least get somewhat familiar of the potential of Adam Warlock and who the character is, or were you left with more questions than you had before you read it?
I don't think I was left with more questions, but thinking of, I mean, and again, you sit there with that all-knowing grin because you have already seen Guardians 3.
There is a chance that I already know things that perhaps not everyone knows. Yes, it's true.
Which is often the case with you, in just general daily life. You
Yes,
tend to know
fair.
things more than most. And, Warlock seems so all-powerful in the pages of these stories that it was then like, okay, how exactly is, I don't know, Rocket Raccoon gonna fight him? But that made
Great
me in some ways
questions.
more excited to see the film because
Yeah.
it's like, wow. And I was seeing what they've done to Will Poulter's young body to get him ready for this character. So now it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, he's looking kind of Thorian, a bit of a Greek Adonis kind of look. So,
Well, if the term Greek Adonis comes up, it must be time for Andy Smith to pop
yes, it
in,
is
because
perfect segue.
we're talking about sleek young bodies and Greek Adonis. Obviously, it is time for Andy Smith to join us.
What perfect timing. My God, you're describing me to a T. I'm like the statue of David, unfortunately, even down to the down below.
Yeah.
So
you're like a slightly depowered Adam Warlock, basically.
Which
Yeah.
means
I think
they teach you in Florida, I'm sorry to tell you.
yeah. So,
Well,
but yeah, I got to admit, dude, when they cast that guy, I was
Yeah.
like, that guy?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
I Googled what he recently looked like. And I was like, oh, that dude actually grew up out of his geekness. So good for him.
Yeah, I will say that this is not a spoiler, but seeing him in Guardians Volume 3, I just will be ready for more whenever they decide to do more with the character.
Really?
No, because it's not that you don't get enough of him. It's more like, okay, let's see what's next for him in the MCU, because
Right.
obviously he's coming in to those characters, and he's not dealing with Thanos, who you'll assume Thanos will stay dead in the MCU, but it depends, how long are they going to keep making movies? Where do they want to pick him out of the timeline? But Andy, first of all, we obviously we appreciate you being here, and we'll make sure to let people know what you're up to before we're done. We'll talk about
Cool.
the Indiegogo. We'll talk about the great show that you and your friend Dennis Turner do. That it's a great show because you've had me on as a guest. If you'd never had me on as a guest, I'd say I hear it's a great show, but
hear it's just an okay show.
I hear it's just okay, but I can vouch for one of those episodes being excellent.
That's right.
But so you worked on the second story that we're talking about, which is called Infinity Finale, but it was also, that in and of itself was part of a trilogy.
Mhm.
So this is going back, I think 7-8 years, somewhere in that range. Talk about getting involved in that, and the notion of like, oh, okay, I'm going to be working on a Jim Starlin project that deals with these like big time, big name cosmic characters.
Well, I mean, the whole way the project came about was I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was the anchor on those projects over Jim, and I was talking to a buddy of mine, and basically, hey, how's it going? And this is back in 2011, and he was like, it's going good, but I just had to turn down a project over Jim Starlin, and I was like, really? He's like, yeah. At the time, my friend was exclusive to DC Comics.
Oh, okay.
So I asked him. Even though I didn't really have to ask him because he turned it down, but I said, well, you don't mind if I email Jim about it? And he's like, go ahead. So I shot Jim an email because I met Jim in early 90s. So I just shot him off an email saying, hey, I heard you got this new project, looking for an anchor. If you haven't found anybody, I'd love to do it. And Jim wrote back and said, that'd be awesome. I gotta let you know though, it's like 100 pages. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Now I didn't know if it was like 5 single issues, or I didn't know what it was.
Right.
Because he's like, I got to run it past the editor. I can't really say much more than that. And I was like, okay. So he did, and the editor contacted me and officially offered me the gig. And at the time, it was only supposed to be that first Thanos graphic novel, and it was supposed to come out right before the movie, or right around the first Avengers movie. And I was like, okay. So, because you remember the after credit scene was Thanos.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And was like, okay, no problem. We had tons of time because this was like the year before that came out in 2012. This was 2011. So there's lots of time. So, that's how I got involved. And the movie obviously did well. The graphic novel did well enough to where Jim said, well, it looks like they want to do 2 more. Are you down? And I was like, of course.
Yeah, right.
So I did those. And then the reason Jim did not draw the third one, the finale, and it was Ron Lim, is because Jim had those Soda Stream things that bubble your water or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Well, long story short, he had one, and he was using it, and using your hands and stuff to make it work, and it actually blew up.
Oh my gosh.
And messed up his hand to the point of he didn't know if he'd ever draw again, and messed up one of his eyes as well.
Wow.
So he obviously could only write it. And, I threw my hat in the ring to draw it. I said, well, I'd love to draw it. And he's like, yeah, I'll throw that out there, but we're going to ask Ron Lim first because, Ron and Jim go way back with Silver Surfer in the 90s, and then the Infinity Gauntlet and War and all that stuff. So it made sense. I was like, yeah. He goes, but if Ron says no, I'll try and get you to. Well, I mean, Ron said yes. And, I was still on board to ink it. So, I inked it. So
yeah, no, and obviously, I mean, Ron had that. I don't know if that was the second or third volume of Silver Surfer, but the one that comes out in like 1987, and that was the first time I really got to see his work on a monthly basis. And I'm like, this is great. This is like, it's sort of right before you got the style of, the McFarlane, the Liefeld, not that their styles are the same, but it was like sort of that different look. And at that point, for those couple of years, like Ron Lim was like the guy, he and maybe Art Adams was a little bit similar, but you didn't see that in monthly books. And I always liked his work. So that's how you've ended up here today. As I was reading that Infinity finale, and I'm like, hey, look who inked this. And you're like, yep, I sure did. And it was the third one that you had done. And I thought it was great that, you got to not only ink Ron Lim in the one that I read, but then also those previous volumes actually getting to ink Jim Starlin, which is great.
Yeah. And in between all that stuff, right around the time I was doing the first one, they also had me ink this Thanos annual that Ron Lim drew.
Right.
And then I think it was after the first one, before we started the second one, because we didn't know. I think what happened was we finished the first one. We didn't know right out of the gate there was going to be a 2 and 3. So Jim wrote this Hulk versus Thanos story, which was going to be a mini series, standalone mini series. Or no, it was supposed to be, I got to remember, there was a Hulk book coming out at the time that Alan Davis was drawing. And I think it was supposed to be issue 7, 8, and 9 of that.
Oh, okay.
But what happened was they said, you know what? Let's just make it a standalone miniseries, Hulk versus Thanos, and do that instead. So that's what they did. And so I inked those, and that was obviously before Jim hurt his hand as well.
Right.
And then we did volume 2. And then, Jim hurt his hand, and, Ron came in and whatnot. So,
and the other part of the story that we were talking about, Infinity Entity, that has Alan Davis as well, who's, I mean, I really know him from Excalibur, and
Mhm.
it's such a unique style, and I've always liked Alan Davis's work.
Oh, yeah.
So it was great. It was like I was like, there's Alan Davis, there's Ron Lim. You get to see some Jim Starlin and Andy Smith. I mean, it was just like it was great. So talk about obviously. So in terms of inking, there's a difference. Sometimes you'll see when the credits are, breakdowns and finishes versus pencils and inking. So the pencils, how done are the images before the inker comes in? Like, for specifically for this story, how much was done when it got into your hands?
Oh, I mean, Jim's what I call, I guess you say classical penciler, because I mean, obviously he's been around since the early 70s.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is all the information is there, like all the rendering is there. The rendering is, of course, the line work and the textures and things like that. Full pencils also mean that all the solid black areas are indicated as well. But Jim's pencils still need interpretation when you ink it, because he's not trying to do line weights. That's the inker's job. He's not trying to do this rendering or feathering on a figure that is so precise that there are pencilers that pencil so tight now that they don't even need an inker, because they just are so ridiculously tight with their pencils. But Jim's not like that. It's kind of like how John Byrne is, George Perez, all these guys from that time period. Everything's there, but if you look at even if you look at Jim, when Al Milgrom would ink Jim Starlin, it looked a certain way. When Terry Austin, who's inked Jim a few times, it looked different, but you could still tell it was Jim. When I inked him, you can still tell it was Jim, but it had some of my style on it. Whereas some of the pencilers today are so tight that there really isn't room to deviate. So
Yeah.
It's hard to tell different inkers apart, because these guys are just so deliberate and almost anal with how tight they pencil. And I understand part of it, because I kind of did that for a while when I broke into the business, because it was kind of like, well, you don't know who's going to ink your work, so better to pencil it really tight so it's almost foolproof than kind of like the older guys like Jim, John Byrne, George Perez, where, if you take any of those guys, they've all gotten bad ink jobs, and it's because the inker just wasn't that good in interpreting what they put down in their pencils.
Right, and I think that there are some that the inker has such a style. You mentioned the one that always stands out to me is Terry Austin. I mean, to me, John Byrne's artwork, when John Byrne inks it, it doesn't hold a candle to when Terry Austin inks it. I prefer it so much, just me personally. But so if a penciler is inked by Terry Austin one month and then maybe somebody like Klaus Janson the next month, it's going to look so radically different, and I mean, and obviously the guys that they inked, I mean, Klaus Janson ends up doing that Punisher book, I think, by himself, but you cut your teeth inking Frank Miller. It's a good way to make a dent. So what I thought was interesting, because I was reading this, having already, messaged you about the fact that you were involved. Some of these images, there's like a heap. There's piles of characters who have all been defeated, and you're like, well, you could do the thing that you would see sometimes in older comics, where it's like, that kind of looks like Wolverine. There's the little points, and here's some of Spider-Man's, the webs on his boot. But talk about just tackling those. And I mean, it's not my job. I just look at it. To me, it seems like it would be fun to be like, yeah, let's see how many characters I can, that we
how many dead bodies can I pile in one place?
How many dead beloved heroes can I ink? Talk about some of those images first, with the ones with many, many characters.
Well, I mean, when it's a spread, 2-page spread, or just a panel that has a lot of characters, first and foremost, you want to ink it clearly enough that distinguishes, who is who, and you have separation, especially when they're all massed together like that. You really want to focus on the separation so it's not just a jumbled mess. And then obviously coloring helps with that as well. So even if especially in this day and age with coloring being done on a computer with all the different tones, and it's not flat. So if the inker were to drop the ball, the colors could pick it up and basically fix it all. But from an inking standpoint, I usually focus on the biggest figure, the most important figure first, and then kind of work my way, down from there. If it's a shot of like, say, Thanos standing on a heap of bodies where there's not a lot of depth, it's all kind of on the same plane, start the top, kind of work my way down. If it's a big group shot where there's many layers of, like foreground figures and then midground and background, I'll always start foreground and work my way back, because once I get to the background, the foreground and midground are done. So I know how much I need to lighten up line weights and such to create that sense of depth and illusion that, it's not just this flat piece of paper that you're looking at.
Right, exactly. Now, Eric, it looks like you're trying to you
Yeah,
want to show something for our visual audience, which we'll describe for our audio audience. But let's see what we've got here.
Yeah, well, actually, I was
Something
trying to
from
find.
Infinity Finale.
Yeah, I was trying to find one of the fight scenes, but as I was looking for this, I was curious. First of all, by the way, hello, I'm Eric, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I must
Sure.
I must not have done a
really
good job
enjoyed-
of hosting. Sorry about that.
Of course.
No, it kept me mysterious. Why not?
Yeah,
That's right.
Not
I
much in
forgot.
life
I
does.
forgot your name as soon as there was someone else in the room. That's
Oh,
how
please,
it works. Yeah.
please. I barely remember me any day of the week. I was curious, and maybe Christian already touched on this, but obviously you've many titles in your long career, but do you recall any specific kind of creative challenges you had personally as an inker in capturing this, which had such a wide range of everything from massive battles to two characters in front of a blank white background? I was curious if there was any specific part of this that you might remember that was a particular challenge for you as an inker.
In the Thanos storyline, I remember Jim did I want to say it was a 2-page spread, and I don't remember what volume it was in. I mean, it was obviously 1 or 2 because Jim drew it. And I'm pretty sure it was a 2-page spread of like deaths, like lack of a better word, castle or something. I remember skulls and stuff, and there weren't a ton of figures on it. It was more just this background image with, I believe there was a big skull maybe in the foreground somewhere. And he just did a lot of texture. And, when it comes to inking figures, I've never really had a problem. I just can look at it, see how I would do it, and just go to town on it. But when it came to that background, it was so expansive, and he had so many different, well, I shouldn't say he had lots of different textures, because as the penciler, he's just using his pencil to indicate line work and stuff. And that was the challenge, because it was my job as the inker to go, okay, I want to make these textures look different, the ground level, or, the ground plane, the stone, whatever the castle thing was made out of. And he did, not necessarily on that spread. If, like I said, if it was a spread, it could have just been one big panel or a splash page. But there was some smoke and stuff he would do. So it was different because, out of most of my career, I've done mostly penciling. I've only, 32 years in the business. I guess if you were going to break it like into years, take all the work I've done inking, would fit into maybe 3 years, total, if I did it, back to back on all the inking projects.
Right.
So, and I haven't inked that many guys either. I've only inked, I think, probably less than 10 different pencilers. Jim is definitely one I've inked the most of. And then the second's probably Bart Sears. And then probably Daryl Banks. But anyhow, so sometimes, because each penciler does stuff differently, it makes me look at it and think, how am I going to do this, or how am I going to interpret it,
Right.
And So that was probably it. That's like a standout that first came to mind.
Yeah, and by the way, I found the panel. This was, and
please.
I apologize. This is one that I would say is
that Jim or Ron? It's hard for me to.
That would
Ron.
be Ron.
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely Ron.
I remember that. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so this for our radio listeners out there in the world, like this is one where I describe this as the kind of moments that gets my 14-year-old bouncing out of his seat in the theaters.
Well, the thing is, I'm like you guys. I love Ron's stuff. Ron got into the business before I did. He started, I think, I want to say he started in the mid '80s, and then he transitioned over to Marvel, '86ish, maybe '87.
Because I remember seeing like early work of his was like, it was an independent publisher. It was something called like the XEX Mutants or something. It was a black and white book.
Oh man, that is. See, I was actually thinking, I know exactly what you're talking about. I forgot about that. I was thinking of Innovation Hero Alliance. He did some stuff for them.
Oh yeah. It was, I was enough of a fan of his that I remember seeing these, and it's, it's something that it was never really that big, this book, because it's like I'm like looking for an image of it while I'm talking to you, and like it's from like 35 years ago, and you could get a copy of it for like $2.50. I should specify, but that was some of the earliest stuff that I remember seeing, and this was probably closer to when he ended up working with Marvel. But
that's the stuff.
It's such like an 80s look too, though, in like a really cool way. But so you look
$2.50, it could be yours.
Amazing comics. Yeah, I know. It's so it was $1.80 and now it's $2.50. So that's
hit a convention dollar box, and I bet you'll find it. So.
That's not representative of inflation in that same time period, but that's not for this show. So sorry. So he started a bit before you. So obviously. And he's, he'd also worked with Jim before. So this probably wasn't one of those like, I'm sure you wanted to draw it, but the idea that they went with him, it was probably like, this is still going to be fun, Yeah,
it was a no brainer. And, the reason Alan Davis and Mark Farmer did the other three is because, Jim still wasn't able to draw at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they offered it to Ron Lim or not. I have no idea. They might not have, because they needed something for Alan to draw, or they might have. And, Ron could have just said, no, I don't want to commit to 300 pages of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a great point. Something that Eric referenced, I was thinking about, these stories they'll have those moments that happen in sort of some kind of nebulous limbo-like kind of location where it really is a mostly white page, but then on that page you'll have a character like Eternity, which has like the representation of like an entire universe. How is that from any point, whether it's penciling, inking, having those kinds of characters, but it's like, well, there's nothing behind them? And is it fun to play with that contrast where it's like, you don't have to have the New York City skyscrapers behind them or something like that, like you would so often in like a fight scene,
No, I mean, I did do something like that once, I think, in Quasar. Okay. I mean, if it's a scene where it's just characters with a white background, that's awesome because we get paid the same. So
it's Miller time.
It's just quicker to draw,
Yeah.
I remember the easiest page I ever had was actually in an issue of Quasar, and it was a splash page. So, first page of the book.
Yeah.
One panel. So, splash page took up the whole page. And it was just I'm pretty sure it was Quasar. It was just a long shot of Earth floating in space. So it's pretty much draw a circle. And it was a long shot, so it's small on the page. So draw a circle, do a little bit of stuff on it so the colorist knows what's basically blue and what's brown for, landmass. And then, maybe so I don't look like I'm totally a hack, put the moon in the shot as well, just so there's something else. And other than that, it's pretty much, I was penciling it. So for the inker, for a space shot, instead of filling in all that black with the side of your pencil, you just write in BWS, which indicates black with stars, to the anchor.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I
Yeah.
basically drew 2 circles. One was Earth, one was the moon, wrote in black with stars in the background, called it a day. I think it took 20 minutes. So, if that. So.
That's great. You know, it's funny that when you said we get paid the same regardless of what's on the page. I remember, one of the number of interviews I've done with Chris Claremont, I was talking about like all the other stuff he was doing while he was still doing Uncanny X-Men after it was big. You know, I mean, at various points, you know, he did Iron Fist and Marvel Team Up and Ms. Marvel and all that. And at some point, I was just like, you know, talking about like. It was basically like, why did you work so much? And he's like, because they paid me by the page. And I was like, that's the greatest answer you could get. It was so, it was like, honestly, and especially because those books, if you remember in the 70s, they only did 17 pages. Right. They had more ads. So it was like, yeah, you're not going to be able to draw one book or write one book and make the right amount of money.
You know, when I went to the Kubrick school for art school in the late 80s, early 90s, you know, Joe Kubrick pretty much said that, you know, a penciler should be able to draw 1 page a day.
Yeah.
Right. So that's 5 a week, 20 pages in a book, 4 weeks, you get it done in a month. And pay is kind of like the pay scale kind of works that way to where, you know, you can, I mean, for a long time when I was drawing a monthly book, I would just draw 1 page a day and I was fine, you know, making a living. An inker should be able to ink 1.5 pages a day because their page rate, because their inking is a little bit lower than a penciler. So to kind of make the same amount of money, you do 1.5 pages, right? And then a colorist should basically, for what they got paid, I'm trying to remember, because this was at the time where it was flat color, so they were actually using watercolors and dyes or photocopies to do the coloring. You know, a colorist should be able to do, I think, 5-6 pages a day. And then the guy lettering the book to kind of make the same amount of money would do probably the book in 2 days, the whole book in 2 days. And then a writer for a writer's page rate, I think kind of a base equivalent, because, and this is all kind of like base stuff, because obviously back then Chris Claremont wasn't Chris Claremont. I mean, now Chris could probably write 1 book a month and make more than he made back then writing 3, you know?
Right. Absolutely.
But for like just type base stuff, a writer probably would have to write 2 books a month for the equivalent of what the penciler did for 1.
Yeah.
You know, for it to kind of work out. It's all roughly in the same ballpark when you look at 2 for the writer, 1 for the penciler, 1.5 books for the inker. You know, the letterer probably needs, if he can do a book in 2 days and a book is 20 pages, you know, he needs, you know, he needs to letter 7-8 books a month.
And then to keep it on Claremont for a moment, I wonder how many days it took poor Tom Orzechowski to write all the dialogue that Claremont would write for him. I feel like that might actually take 4 days.
The funny thing is, though, so the guy that letters my stuff now, we went to school together. He's been, you know, doing it for the same amount of time I've been drawing, 32 years. And now he does everything on the computer. But when he got into the business, it was all still lettered by hand.
Sure, yeah.
And, you know, when he started off, he had to rule everything out. You know, you would rule all the guidelines for your lettering. And then a lot of guys would letter it in pencil first, because if they made a mistake, they could erase it. And then they'd go back over their pencil, you know, using their lettering pen, you know, and ink. And then the faster you get and the more your eyes attune to it, you rule it all out. But the pencil's just out the window. And, you know, you can just, you're just so good, you just go right in with the ink.
Right.
And I'm almost tempted to say, I'd have to ask him. And he, you know, my letterer, Steve, I don't know, because I don't think he's hand lettered in a long time, but probably when he was like 7 or 8 years in doing hand lettering, he might not, and I could be wrong, but he might not even have had to rule the lines out, because you just, I mean, you see people like my wife can do it. Women always have great handwriting. She can pull out a blank sheet of paper and just start writing, and you'd swear there's a line underneath each one. Whereas if I do that, it just starts going all over the place. So
Yeah, no, I know. Obviously, it's all different with how much is done on computers now, especially coloring and lettering, and obviously
yeah.
what it looks
What
like. And
and
what were
actually,
you
I
going to
was
say,
gonna,
Eric?
yeah, I was actually really curious, like for yourself then, how much, how's how much of your work then is you you know paper, ink, pencils versus computer? How much has it changed for you over the years?
Well, on the current book I'm working on, Core Draft, it's 100% paper. The only computer is once the page is done, I have to scan it in and, put it down to the proper size and do a little cleanup and then, send it off to the colorist and the letterer. But on previous books, I would draw the pages on the computer and then print them out onto the full size Bristol board that I use for paper. And then I would do all the inking traditional because I like having an original piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
But for this project, I just want to kind of go back to basic, I don't know, my roots or what I used to do, which was just sit at my desk, pull out the blank sheet of paper, look at my script, and then, do a thumbnail and then start drawing.
So it sounds like you're a little bit fluid, like you kind of go back and forth, or is this going back to 100% hand drawn a real departure for you in recent, I don't know, the past 10, 15 years?
No, not really. Because even when I was doing my previous projects before this one, every now and then I would just feel like, you know what, I just don't want to sit at the computer to draw. I want to just sit at my desk for a change. It just depends. Like the computer's good because, if I draw something too big or too small, instead of having to erase it, I can just, select it and zoom, blow it up, scale it up or down. Whereas if I'm doing it on paper and I draw something a little too big or too small, 9 times out of 10, I'll just go, okay, let's say I didn't have the luxury of being able to scan this in and fix it and print it out and, trace it off. How can I resolve this problem? One, I could erase it and redo it. Or two, maybe I can, how can I make this work without having to erase it?
Right.
So if a figure's too big in the panel, I might just be like, well, I'll just make it work. And then, once it's lettered, if it's just too cramped inside the panel, well, I can always go back in and Photoshop and, adjust my art down so lettering fits better, or it just might work fine,
Well, this seems like a perfect opportunity to mention what you are working on now, which is Core Draft, The Reckoning.
That is it.
Talk a little bit about it. For our visual audience, they're probably going to get a Conan the Barbarian vibe, but talk a little bit about it and let people know how they can get involved in it. I mean, it's doing very well, as you can see for the backers. It's on Indiegogo, but talk a little bit about Core Draft.
So Core Draft is basically Conan dumped into a Game of Thrones type atmosphere with a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons thrown in from the standpoint of the magic that Dungeons and Dragons characters can utilize. The basic story is Core Draft and Adriana, who is his sorceress girlfriend. They belong to 2 different tribes. He's from the Red Lions. She's from the Black Eagles. And they're out on, you could basically say, a quest that the leader of his tribe sent them on. And when they come back to his tribe, once they're done, his tribe was totally slaughtered. Everybody's slaughtered. The whole encampment's been burned down. Of course, he doesn't know why this happened or who did it. So now it's kind of a mystery that he has to unfold to find out, why this happened. Why was his tribe singled out this way? Now, when you read the campaign page, you'll see that the Necro Knight, who's the main bad guy, is the one that set all this in motion. But, Core Draft doesn't know that. So he has to, with the help of Adriana, go back to her tribe and through magic and other means kind of fit the pieces of this puzzle together to find out what the heck is exactly going on and why this happened. And that's why it's Core Draft the Reckoning, because he's out for blood. 76 pages. It is pretty action packed. It's a fast paced story. There's also in the theme of the whole Dungeons and Dragons, if you're into role playing like that, my co-creator Dennis is actually writing a 24-page game module, so which is not based on this story. This is a brand new story he's writing for the game. So it's playable with characters you might have created for other role-playing games, or in Core Draft right now, 4 of the main characters are playable characters where we have their stats and everything that everybody that's backed the campaign is going to get as well. So they can actually play the Core Draft characters in that game.
Right. And the best way to find it, I guess, is to go to Indiegogo and type in Core Draft,
Nope.
right? Okay, you tell me.
No. Unfortunately, that's not going to get you anywhere.
Okay.
Indiegogo, don't really know why, but this campaign, as well as a few others, and I happen to know all the people that own the other campaigns, are shadow banned. So if you go to Indiegogo and type in my name or Core Draft, if you type in Core Draft, you won't find anything. If you type in my name, you'll find my previous campaigns, but not this one. So
interesting.
You can try Googling the exact name, as if you're watching this, it says Core Draft The Reckoning by Andy Smith. So if you Google that, Indiegogo should show up. There's also coredrath.com, and it's spelled KOR-DRATH.com, and there's an order here tab, which will take you to it. Did you find it? What are you showing?
I found it surprisingly easily, and I am your newest backer. So,
well, thank you. So wait, you went to Indiegogo and found it?
Yeah, you found it on Indiegogo.
I Googled Indiegogo and then Core Draft.
Oh, but you didn't just go straight to Indiegogo.
No. I did both.
Okay. So Google got
Indiegogo plus the title.
Google,
you're there.
Well,
or I just gave $38 to who knows who.
No, it was me. So the Core Draft website does have some more stuff on it that is not on the campaign page, because there's only so much you can put on the campaign page. The campaign has the first 8 pages that can be read. The website has the first 11. Now, I will say, before you click on interior pages, the reason the campaign only has 8 because page 9 is a little saucy. So it's, it's a little bit of
hold on. You didn't say anything about sauce. I'm canceling my order now.
It's a little bit of Core Draft and Adriana, let's say, relaxing after a long day.
Yeah. I know from talking to you previously, there was this idea that Adriana, in the early conception, might have been his sister, and then the idea was it might be better for storytelling if perhaps they're not related. Like, let's not get into Game of Thrones territory.
They I think cornered the market on that.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. So in terms of you're part of the way done in terms of people actually getting the books. Is that this year, early next year? Hard to say.
Oh no, it's so the campaign has an estimation of November, this year for fulfillment. But I'm on I just started page 56 out of the 76. So, I mean, we're hoping to fulfill early. If no major hiccups come along or anything, people should be getting their books before November. But, I like to pad things because I'd rather pad it and be early than, say June and be late.
Yeah.
So November is the definite. And then, hopefully earlier than that, because like I said, I'm 56 into 76. So,
and also one thing I just noticed on the campaign, sorry for interrupting, Christian, was there's just a lot of stuff there too. It's like you have like beanies, or like you can commission to get a private.
And I'm also a fan of the heavy metal T-shirt that I don't have up at the moment. But the last time that we spoke, I was going through, and I'm like, I love the metal T-shirt. You could wear it to an Iron Maiden shirt, and probably you could wear it to an Iron Maiden concert. Everybody's like, "What is that? I want to know more." And
I tell you, I would love to be able to order the shirts now. Yeah. And I mean, we have, we've sold enough, but you know, if something changes down the road, you know, when it comes to shirts, and you probably know this, you want to only have to place one order.
Correct.
Right? Because
Yeah.
if you place one for, say, you know, 50, that's great. But then if you have to go back and you need to place, say, 6 or 7 more, you can't, because there's a minimum order. So right now we're past the minimum order, but I'd rather keep it going. I think sometime during the summer, because the shirts will ship separately from the books. So I think sometime during the summer, I'll probably put the word out that the shirts are coming down, so we can get the orders in and get them out while it's still summertime for people that might not live in, you know, warm climates year round or something, so they can actually wear it. Plus, I want to wear one.
So, yeah, didn't Core Draft open for Guar back in 91?
It was a great tour. Yeah, there you had to you really had to wear the poncho to the Core Draft Guar show.
That's right.
And also, we referenced it earlier. Make sure to let people know where they can find the show that you do with your co-creator Dennis Turner.
Oh yeah, it's the Dennis and Andy show. It's Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Unless my daughter's working till 5 and I have to pick her up, then it's at 3:30 Eastern time. You can just go to YouTube and search Dennis and Andy show, and the channel will come up. You can search Andy Smith comic artist. That my channel comes up. We stream live on both channels, so you can watch it on either one. But of course, as you say, or should, subscribe to both. Subscriptions are free.
Yeah,
and there
exactly.
you go.
And one of the things that you guys do is you see a movie pretty much every week, and you'll talk about whether it's, you know, comic book, science fiction, fantasy. You'll talk about a movie pretty much every week. Right?
Pretty much weekly. We just saw Friday, because I was at. We usually go Thursday night because, you know, they come. It's funny. Movies used to always be Fridays. Now they drop Thursday night at 7, but they still say premiering Friday. Yeah. So we try to go Thursday to do the review first thing Friday to put up. I was out of town Thursday, so we saw Sisu on Friday night, which was fan-freaking-tastic.
I've heard good things. I haven't seen it yet. I was busy taking my son to see the re-release of Return of the Jedi yesterday.
And I took my daughter yesterday.
He's 7. Yeah, you went on Friday. My son's 7. I was 7 when it came out, and I saw it almost exactly 40 years ago. And that was it was great to see it on the big screen, even though it's the special edition. You know, it's the special edition going in, and for all the extra stuff
with the special edition, besides the addition of Hayden at the end, that was it, wasn't it?
It's the band at Jabba's Palace. There's a whole production number. They take out the Ewok celebration, and they take out the original Cy Snoodles and the Max Rebo band performance from the old edition. Yeah, and I've talked about this before. I had a 45 that was the A side was Ewok Celebration, and the B side was that song was called Lapti Neck. And you know, this band Miko, who did like the disco Star Wars, and they did a lot of music for George. You know, they did the Christmas in the Stars album, stuff like that. They did that song. So this 45 that I had as a kid that I loved, both of those were taken out of the special edition in 1997. But so apart from those two scenes, though, there's a lot of it like the Sarlacc looks better. There's a lot of effects.
Oh no, I knew that.
What they did made it better, except that it's like, oh, I kind of have a fondness for those scenes, but you know, whatever. My kid has no idea.
So I told my daughter, and she's seen it. Obviously, she's a huge Star Wars fan, huge Star Wars collection. She watches it. She watches the first 3, or now 5, 6, and 7, or 4, 5, and 6 constantly on Disney Plus. But she's obviously never seen it in the theater. She turns 20 on Friday, so we're taking her to Guardians on Friday.
Nice.
But so obviously she's never seen it, whereas I saw it when I was 13. So we went yesterday. A lot of it was new to me because I don't think I've watched that movie, honestly, more than 3 times since I saw it in the theater. Okay. Because I like Star Wars, I like Star Trek, but I don't love them to the point of rewatch over and over and over. I mean, I don't do that with even movies I love. I don't watch them over and over because my mind just starts jumping ahead, you know. But it was
Yeah,
fun
that makes
seeing it in
sense.
the theater because of so much of it that I forgot. I mean, I remembered
Yeah.
all the main scenes, but all the in between stuff, totally forgot. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's always a favorite when the Rancor keeper is just devastated the
I
death of
know.
the. He's just
Oh,
crying
dude.
so much. I'm just like, I love that guy. And that's one of my favorite, most useless action figures that I have from 40 years ago is the Rancor keeper. But
You know, the one thing
anyway,
they didn't fix though, that,
what's that?
you know, with your saying the stuff they enhanced on the planet with the Ewoks, I don't. It's what were the machines called that were walking that, you know,
So
the
there's the
AT-AT?
AT-ATs, and then the smaller ones. I think I don't know what the official name was, but they were like chicken walkers is basically
Yeah,
what.
well,
Yeah.
my point is the small ones, and even the AT-ATs for that matter, you think they could have made them not look so stop motion, because they
Yeah, I
still
know.
look just as bad stop motion as they did back then. It's
I
like, here's a
think
leg moving,
don't
pause it,
don't
move to the next leg.
encourage George
Yeah.
to go back in again and change it again. You know, it's
I don't think he has the power to.
I
so
thought
Not
Jason
anymore.
and the
Yeah.
Argonauts was going to come fight them at
Yeah.
one point. So.
Right, exactly.
Well, I'm excited for both of you to see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I'm excited for everyone to see it. I think everybody's going to have fun with it. This has been a great summer for fun movies. I thought, Dungeons and Dragons was fun. Super Mario Brothers was fun. I didn't need any more out of either of those movies. Anybody looking for something else, that's fine. I didn't need more. And I think that this is right in line with that. And I think people who like the Guardians and like the Guardians movies will be very happy with this movie. And all you can think after seeing it is, oh man, DC's actually got a chance at putting out a couple good ones. Although I hear the Flash is amazing from people who've already seen it, the upcoming Flash movie. So
I hope it is. I can't stand Ezra Miller because of all the off-screen antics.
I agree, and that surprises me, by the way, that the movie is still coming out with Ezra Miller,
especially with how bad his off-screen antics are.
Yeah,
they're horrible. Yeah, they should be in jail.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but I gotta say, for people that don't know it, like when I watch that trailer, and I kind of say, okay, let's act like I know nothing about Ezra Miller's real life.
Sure.
Looks awesome. I think it looks great.
Yeah. Well, in Justice League, Ezra Miller was the only one who seemed to get the assignment. Like Ezra Miller shows up and is having the best time. Totally is like the one character where you're like, all right, I get Flash.
Yeah.
The other ones, everyone's so mopey.
I dragged my wife to see Justice League, the obviously the theatrical Joss Whedon cut. I value my marriage. I would not make her watch the Zack Snyder cut. But we went to go see it. I did too, but I'm not going to tell my wife it's a 4-hour movie.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I have kids. That's why I have boys.
Do you want to? Yeah, exactly. I'll make my kid watch it. But what she said was that Flash saved the movie for her, the Justice League movie, because she really liked the character.
And Jason Momoa is fun too, but
but I mean, it was like consistently throughout. That's what you like. So yeah, I'm excited for that. But people will be able to see you talk about that over there, and then obviously on my YouTube channel, Blackcast, BLADTCAST, we do our Marvel movie talk show. We'll do some special episodes there. Hopefully, I'll talk to both of you at some point in the weeks ahead, and looking forward to doing all of that. And speaking of Flash, next month's entry for the Geekscape Book Club will indeed be Flashpoint, which is a very divisive storyline, and I've never read it, so I'm excited.
Are you serious?
I've never been a DC guy. I had a friend who basically bought me Crisis on Infinite Earths so that I would finally read it, and I'm like, this was amazing. I'm so glad I read it. But I was always a Marvel homer. You know, I read very little DC as a kid, and even in more recent times.
I was pretty equal growing up with both, because I'm an art guy, so if there was a good artist, I bought it. But I like
especially like George Perez leaves Marvel for such a long time. It's like if you want to see his work, you have to buy DC. Yeah.
Well, and that was one of the points I thought of, even when you put together the book club for Geekscape. That's kind of fun. Is like we're almost like the holes in our knowledge and the holes in our what we've read over the years, and we found out like there was a whole bunch of things that it's almost silly that as guys who grew up reading these comics who love the Marvel lore and also bits of the DC lore too, like that we hadn't read these. So
Yeah.
that's what's been kind of fun about this.
That's why we started doing
Yeah.
doing the show. And the first one we did was Batman Year One, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, I hadn't read it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's who I was. And also, like, once anything had any kind of value, you're like, well, I have to wait for a trade paperback anyway. And then by then, I guess I'd probably moved on. But anyway, so we'll talk about Flashpoint next month. The schedules are a little tricky in May, so follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. I will make sure to let everybody know when we will have that. I know we try to let you know when the next episode will be, but there's too many moving pieces in May into June, but we will get to it before the Flash comes out. Just a final thought on what we were talking about for most of the past hour plus. Is there something, any of these characters that we're talking about, that you would most like to get a chance to draw again, Andy? Whether it's Adam Warlock, Thanos, anybody from these stories, like, it would be the most fun to tell another story with, Silver Surfer, or anybody come to mind?
I think Warlock, because I didn't get to draw Warlock much.
Yeah,
I drew one issue of Warlock in the Infinity, whatever that book was back then during
the Infinity Watch.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's the one. And that's the first. That was the only time up until the Thanos stuff, almost 20 years later, that I worked with Jim, because Jim wrote it.
Yeah.
So I think Warlock. I've drawn Thanos a few times in the early 90s when I first started. And the Silver Surfer I did 3 issues of, but Warlock would be fun.
Yeah, and I think that it's a character that spent my prime years reading comics. He was basically dead. Thanos was dead, and then by the time that Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War come up, that's where I'm like, okay, this is like somebody I'd read about and heard reference, but hadn't really seen that much of. Eric, I want to make sure that people know where to find you before we say goodbye. Where can you be found, sir?
I can be found so many places, including Count Eric Conner on Twitter. That's ERICCONNER. I hope you know how to spell count. And I'm also on Instagram, not on TikTok, because I'm old and it's creepy when old men are on TikTok.
Same.
Yeah. Very creepy. And if you're in the Burbank area, I'll plug. I'm going to be returning to the stage for the first time in many, many decades. I'm going to be bringing every ounce of my old Jewness to the role of Mushnik, the old miserly Jew. I don't think I'm a miser in real life.
No, not in real life.
I'll be doing a little singing, a little dancing, not too much. Don't worry.
Nice.
Check out Little Shop of Horrors if you're in the Burbank area at the Victory Theater. Tickets are at the London Theater Company.
And I will be there Friday, May 19th with my wife.
Meet Christian Bladt in person.
Yes, I will. I'll schedule a meet and greet for only $90. I'll take a picture and sign something for you.
You'll take a picture in front of the In-N-Out down the street.
That's a great idea, actually.
There you go.
In any case, thank you both. Thanks to everybody for checking it out. We'll catch up with you next month for Flashpoint, and we'll keep reading until then. Good night, everybody.
Good night.